Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.
Making It Personal with Bishop William Johnson on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. I'm Jean Till, and on today's show, we're visiting with Dr. Angela Franks, Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America, and she has a book out, Body and Identity, A History of the Empty Soul.
Empty self. The self figures so prominently, Jean. But
yes.
Yeah, I can see where you get off track. But she definitely engages the soul in its role in the kind of trajectory of Judeo-Christian thought and where the modernity kind of appropriate that. But already we're getting into deeper things. But let's just see as we continue to move about the cabin of the diocese in many ways, and the chrism oil continues to be distributed. Mm-hmm. But this interim period between the Ascension and Pentecost, I was joking, it was kind of a Dowling octave in a way, Dowling Catholic High School, as we did the groundbreaking for their major $70+ million enhancement, addition, and renewal of that campus. So that was a festive day on Tuesday. Baccalaureate Mass last night for the graduates, and Father James Downey did an outstanding job. Even kind of as I reviewed Dr. Franks' work, he talked about not living for appearances, or the ways in which even we can just kind of bounce from first communion party, graduation party, et cetera, and just kind of, pay a superficial due and then go on our way without really engaging. So that was a provocative homily, and then the commencement on Friday night as well. So we'll be administering confirmation, Our Lady America's and St. Teresa's, your stomping ground.
That's right. We're all ready for you.
And as I meet with the candidates there, the confirmation team, has a judge and an attorney. So I always feel, are they going to object when I pose questions to the young people in our more casual conversation beforehand? Then we'll be at Immaculate Conception St. Mary's and St. Pius X on Sunday, the annual Memorial Day Mass at Glendale
on
Cemetery
Monday.
with the clergy, religious, and bishops as well. So,
and if it's rained out, it is at St. Teresa's.
At St. Teresa's also. And then Tuesday.
My first time going was last year.
Oh, is that right?
Because I thought, this is for whatever group. And it was like, it's for everybody. And it was beautiful.
Yeah, it really is.
And people need to say, I'm going to take that hour and go. It's just wonderful.
And obviously remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice, but it's also the Memorial Mary, Mother of the Church, so we'll draw that in. And Tuesday morning, St. Luke's School and Ankeny will be with the school young people for Mass, but also their groundbreaking. The fourth groundbreaking in a month, so lots of things are being planted and built and extended in the footprint of our diocese, but it's the people, obviously, who are at the heart of it all. So we'll do that. Their Phase 3 addition to enhance the school property also. So Pentecost, that moment this weekend as we celebrate the way in which God gives us the reciprocal opportunity to give and receive in the manner that no one's diminished as the Trinity. And we can console, encourage, and challenge each other as the Spirit bestows a new identity upon us as adopted daughters and sons in Christ. So welcome, Dr. Franks, as we kind of had a long wind-up here, but so pleased that you could be with us, and the winding down of an academic semester in the Academy of Catholic Theology, in which you're the outgoing president, a woman who appears in various places, EWTN, a Fox News consultant, speaker, and cherished person for the U.S. bishops as a consultant for the Doctrine Committee, which is the basis of our initial connection. So thank you for taking time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Do you kind of chart the summer as a time to do more scholarship, or is it time to have fun with your family, or a little bit of both?
For academics, summer is usually the time we catch up and move forward all the writing projects that we had hoped to be working on during the year, but that didn't get the attention we had hoped. So there'll definitely be a lot of that. But yes, also for sure, spending time with family and relaxing.
Wonderful. Yeah. And so very much both a classroom teacher and I imagine a mentor to graduate students also. We're almost approaching the break here, so we'll just kind of leave you with this question to ponder for a moment. Your your pedigree has you, first degree and master's degree in philosophy at the Catholic University of America. I don't know if you hung out with the Basilian seminarian scholars or not in part of your studies, but then theology. Was this an intentional plan that if you were going to become a crackerjack theologian, that philosophy would be a necessary foundation? So we're not going to let you answer the question. I'm sorry. But we'll get back to that as we take this break.
When we return, we will continue our conversation with Dr. Angela Franks, Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America, and her book, Body and Identity, A History of the Empty Self. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network. Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson. On today's show, we're visiting with Dr. Angela Franks, Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America, and her new book that she has out, Body and Identity, A History of the Empty Self.
And so I kind of teed it up for you, Dr. Franks, that just, maybe not every theologian has that kind of deeper philosophical foundation, whether from the Judeo-Christian or the history of philosophy, but that's a part of the richness of the book that you provide for us. So was that something intentional for you?
Yes, it really was. I mean, a standard thing for people to do, as your seminarians do, is to get a bachelor's degree in philosophy and then go on to do theology at the graduate level. I was at a school that had a really solid theology department for my bachelor's degree, and I didn't take that for granted. And so I majored in theology at the undergrad level and took a lot of philosophy classes, but I really did want to go on and go deeper in philosophy. And it's kind of funny, I was always trying to get away with writing theology papers in my philosophy classes, and now this book that I wrote, and most of my work right now is hugely philosophical. It's almost a majority of what I'm doing to kind of tease out the questions. So it came back to, God was laughing at that.
And you move so nimbly between the two, I think that the kind of companionship of philosophy and theology in the way that Fides et Ratio, Pope John Paul's encyclical, envisioned the faith and reason and the way in which they can both lead us to the truth. But you expose truth, but you also find yourself with some unlikely suspects in this book as you kind of advance your thesis, which is rich. But you're a woman who has done scholarship in theology of the body, gender theory, eugenics, and so your breadth and familiarity, but truly the interest in the human person, even the title of the talk I believe you'll be giving at the Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit, What is Man? That you're mindful of him. So the sense of the person today, and we look forward to Pope Leo's first encyclical, Magnificat Humanitas, on Monday, the human person, the magnificent humanity and AI. But does AI only kind of add fuel to the fire of some of the main theses in your book, Body and Identity?
Yes, I think that's true. I don't get into technology in any great length in this book, so I do allude to it a few times. But part of what I'm arguing is that we've been seeing an emptying out of the human person, which is a little bit counterintuitive because people talk about narcissism, and we're in a culture of narcissism, which I fully agree with, and I talk about that. But what narcissism is really an empty self and not a robust, full, fulfilling self. And so I think with something like AI, you see this loss of confidence, like at least among students, you see this loss of confidence that people can do the kind of intellectual work that we've really been designed to do. And so I think it is another symptom of this empty self.
Oh, and an empty self, and then the as you say, the kind of liquid identity, which is an intriguing phrase that kind of is woven throughout the book. This liquid identity, the fluidity of who we are, and that's appropriated almost as a positive thing extolled by our culture. What do you mean by liquid identity?
Yeah, I get this term from a sociologist, Zygmunt Bauman, who talks about liquid modernity. And in liquid modernity, what we privilege is flexibility. freedom, but freedom understood in terms of having a lot of options and being able to pivot easily from one option to another. So he talks about our identity in liquid modernity being, it's like we're ships and we temporarily drop anchor in different identity ports, but we want to be able to pull up anchor and leave really quickly, right? So it's not like we put down roots in an identity somewhere, and online identity politics, like that makes, it's really easy to do this online because, from the very get-go of people using the internet, you had people fabricating identities online that they presented to people, and you can like play with an identity that doesn't actually match your real body. We're in this age where we privilege being able to move easily from one identity to another.
And yet that supposed freedom and detachment, as you note in one further into the book, we find ourselves panicking all the time, the stress and anxiety that results from this.
Yeah, Bauman says, if you're the only one who's responsible for your identity, then you're also the one who bears all the blame if you don't craft a good identity. And so this just really stresses people out, and they deal with it, again, with basically online identity politics, where Bauman says you're picking an identity suit off the rack rather than sewing it yourself. And, online it can be like, oh, well, this identity gets a lot of likes, this gets a lot of approval, this must be a good identity. So it's understandable why people do this, but this also means that these identities are really superficial and don't necessarily have anything to do with who a person really is.
And with that, and the fluidity that's there, but then the kind of estrangement from my past. I can either just kind of divorce myself from that, or not a clinical schizophrenia, but I can simply say, well, that's not who I am. So there's not this continuity of identity. That Gene, you're the same person who married John a few years ago. I was ordained bishop 6.5 years ago, and my priesthood, and how that emerged in the context of my family and all that was there. So that holistic and organic sense that, which there are some speed bumps and there's some deviations along the way, but that is part of the claiming of the true I, the identity. I think maybe in your three senses of identity that you advance, can you just unfold those for us?
Yeah, what you're talking about just now is the first sense of identity, namely continuity through time, right? I'm the same person that I was yesterday when I went to bed. And God willing, if I get up tomorrow, I'll be the same person tomorrow. And that's the most basic sense. The second sense of identity is what's often captured when people use authenticity language. So I think contemporary authenticity isn't, has a lot of problems with it. But who am I really? And so some philosophers use the language of the true self, who am I, at my deepest core? And then the third sense of identity is my ability to reflect on who I am. And it's this last sense of identity that in contemporary philosophy, modern philosophy in general, that's kind of taken up all the oxygen in the room. And so there's a popular book on neuroscience that came out a couple years ago that says, who am I? Whoever I want to be, whoever I claim that I am, or, whatever story I narrate, that's actually who I am. And that's saying that, how I think or feel about myself is just really all that there is to who I am. So we have this, in contemporary society, we have a flattening out of the richness of identity and kind of putting all of the emphasis on how I perceive myself. But people who are off, so it's kind of like the Star Wars version of identity. Luke, search your feelings, right? And that can be an important step in discernment, but it's not asking a more objective question who actually am I? Not just what I feel I am, but is there something that's even deeper than my feelings that I need to try to access? And so that's ultimately what I argue, that we can't, all these different senses of identity are real, but we can't reduce it just to our feelings about ourselves, but we really need to kind of drill down and ask ourselves, in fact, ultimately, who is the saint that God made me to be? right? And that's much deeper than my feelings and a challenge to myself and involves God's grace. And yeah, it's just a much richer way of answering the identity question.
Angela, as I hear you talking about that, I think of what that disconnect can be, though. If you're putting this persona out there that is, good and even faithful and, holy and engaged in solving the problems of the world, and yet you come home and you are not that person, what you've put out on social media and all of that. And now you have to deal with, okay, how did I lie to myself? How did I lie to everyone else? And I think that can create a huge disconnect for society, and the home, for that matter.
Yeah,
but
definitely. I think that, go ahead, Bishop.
No, please, go ahead.
I was thinking that we really do have a society-wide imposter syndrome because of that, and it's partly because we have these tools that people did not used to have. There didn't used to be this ability to reach a public beyond the people you're geographically around for the most part. And now that we have all of these tools, it's super easy to put out a sense of ourselves that's the person we want to be. But then it takes all this energy trying to maintain this facade, and it's part of the cause of our anxiety. It's just healthier to be in the truth because the truth is safe, even if that means I'm flawed and, I'm not where I want to be yet. I'm not as pretty as I want to be. I don't know, but it's just better to be in the truth.
And it's a lot less work because then I don't have to keep recalling who was I to this group and who was I to this person or this situation. Yeah, there's that identity one sense that's there also. And you alluded a moment ago, that who did God make me to be? That there ultimately, hopefully, is a sense of gratitude for the givenness of my I. That I've come and I'm rooted in a story in the family. Maybe not what I would have made up in my own kind of idyllic narrative, but that's where the grace is to be found. I have cited in the past to our not young people, that Madeleine Debrel, the French social worker and mystic, that conversion involves coming to appreciate not only whom I think I am, but God's proposal for who I am, and that He's got something much more wondrous for us. Magnificent humanity, if Pope Leo can be borrowed already. So, the companion thesis is the kind of totem of the body, and how it plays into this, kind of separation of appearance from the reality. You don't mention tattoos at all in the book, I don't believe, but and I don't want to sound.
I think I have one mention, but I'm not even positive. So
okay, well, again, as I sped read, I maybe missed that, but and I don't want to be down on tattoos, and sound like some kind of crank, but there can be a dimension where that's a manifestation of what you're claiming.
Yeah. I think we can view our bodies as either a window, so that they're what makes ourselves visible and tangible in the world, which is what John Paul II says, that the body expresses the person. So that's one approach. Or we can view our bodies as a screen or a canvas, on which I'm going to use to kind of decorate, to project my image into the world. And that way of using the body as a screen, and then the way that we kind of worship our bodies, but yet we also kind of hate our bodies, and we blame our bodies. It's like, well, I would be happier if my body were different. So our bodies take up a lot of psychic energy and a lot of blame, and ultimately we get angry with them, because if we kind of idolize our bodies, then eventually that means our bodies are going to fail us, because they're not actually divine, and they're not going to do what we want them to do for us. And I think that's when people rebel against their bodies and do different kinds of destructive things to their bodies. So it's kind of simultaneously both elevating and denigrating our bodies when it comes to who we are.
Yeah, wonderful. I don't want to lurch too rapidly to another topic, but it helps you to kind of advance your overall project that, you delve into literature, Jane Austen, Mansfield Park, But then you begin to talk about vampires and Bram Stoker. Just trying to hook in our audience here in case they, were distracted for a moment. But vampires and zombies and the role of literature and how it's manifesting a kind of cultural trend of modernity and beyond.
Yeah, I was really worried that the literature chapter, that the press or the peer reviewers are going to be like, why is this here? Like, this should go. But fortunately, one of the peer reviewers said it was his favorite chapter, and that's my experience when people read the book, that it's like their favorite chapter. And I landed on vampires and zombies, and I honestly actually hate horror movies, and I never watch that stuff. But like one of the phrases that was guiding me is that today we have liquid bodies and empty cells. And it seemed to me that vampires really sum up the liquid bodies and zombies really sum up the empty cells. And so I tried to argue that in the monsters that a society makes for themselves, that it's revelatory, right, of what we fear, and revelatory of the things that we that we find important as well. So that's how the vampire zombie chapter unfolded. And I, for the first time, read Bram Stoker's Dracula, all of this.
Well, there's always room for growth.
That's right. Research comes in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So, and would you allow your kids to read Dracula? We got to hold that question, Jean. She's giving me that look. Johnson posed another question right before the break. So, all right, stand down, please.
When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Angela Franks, Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America, and her book, Body and Identity, A History of the Empty Self. Now, to find out more about Angela and her writings, go online to angelafranks.com. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network. Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Johnson.
Thank you, Professor Franks, for staying with us and kind of posing the question, whether you'd let your children read Bram Stoker. I imagine you're expansive in the exposure to the literary tradition. Does your identity as a theologian inform your vocation as a spouse and mother of 6 children?
It definitely does enter into how I parent, I think, because I'm aware that they have a supernatural destiny, and that's something that I try to keep in mind. Like, I think one can always integrate these things better, but yeah, I definitely do think, and I have a sense of the contemporary issues, and so I try to subtly discuss those a bit with them.
Because your oldest is how old?
My oldest is 24.
Oh, yeah, okay,
12.
yeah.
Yeah, so we're entering fully into the adolescent and young adult era.
Okay, so you're not quite saying mission accomplished on the front end yet, but no, it goes on. But
it's never done.
You try to, I think, bring things to a conclusion of where you're driving us is being the blood of Dionysius or the vineyard of the Lord, and so the Christian dimension is there present. Sometimes it's recedes to the background, but that life and personhood as a mission.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I argue in the book is that our liquidity in general is in part and to a large degree induced by Christianity and Christian ideas of being free to follow God's direction. Because before Christianity and in non-Christian societies, people's identity is mostly formed by your social status, your family, your work, all of these kind of impersonal exterior realities. And Christianity says those things are important, but the ultimate thing is what God is calling you to do. And so this idea of liquid identity gets secularized, and all kinds of deleterious things happen that I trace in the book, all kinds of negative stuff. But ultimately, that I think is the core of our true self: is who is the saint God is calling me to be? What is the mission that He is sending me on? And that word mission has this sense of dynamic liquidity, but it's not pure liquidity because God's call for me creates guardrails, who he made me to be as a human being, as a woman, as, the limits that are baked into my created reality. So it's solid in a sense, but it's also liquid in a sense because I'm sent out to do God's will in some particular area.
Well, I think, in Iowa this weekend, Des Moines, the state track meets occurring, and the magnificence of the athletic performances, some of whom are setting records and everything else. But I watched them, and that was never my possibility, and some of the performances that they have. I'm not trying to set up antagonism as we begin to wind down in our less than a minute and a half here. But, Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis said each person has infinite dignity, and we are called to recognize each person has infinite possibilities. Is there a tension there?
So, as in the abstract, Aristotle already said that, man has the possibility to know all things just because of how our mind is made. And now we're not, in fact, ever going to know all things because we're not God. But there is this... Our reason and our freedom give us a certain kind of infinite possibility, but concretely our bodies and history and our lives narrow down those possibilities. And then God himself narrows down those possibilities and how he's calling us to actually fulfill ourselves. And so I think that tension does work. Both of those things are in play, but we only navigate all of those possibilities, all of these choices when we're attuned to God's will for me and God's mission for me. And that gives us our course to chart, through all of these possibilities.
That's a wonderful note to conclude on, Dr. Franks. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to maybe good blessings on your possible writing project, The Epiphany of Being, your next envisioned book. And we look forward to some lively engagement at the Bishop's spring meeting in the Doctrine Committee. So thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. Thanks to our guest and all of you, our listeners in Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, wherever you may be, listening to the Iowa Catholic Radio Network and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.